Happy Sunday before Halloween. We're here, many of us in our costumes, as we join in this intergenerational service to be followed by a fun Halloween festival and connections fair immediately afterwards. I spent a little too much time this morning trying to determine if I have a stole that wouldn't clash with my lime green Riddler's outfit. I finally gave up and just went for garish. Halloween has its roots in several traditions, some of them going back thousands of years, including the practice I want to talk about today: donning costumes and wearing masks, identity-altering masks, not the safety masks we've gotten used to wearing. It's interesting, isn't it? Whether we are a child, a youth, or an adult of almost any age, when we put on our masks and our costumes, we often assume at least some of the persona our get-ups are intended to portray. I'll come back to this a little more later, but for now it's worth noting that we may be so good at doing this explicitly on Halloween because we get lots of practice doing it implicitly in our daily lives. Metaphorically, we put on masks. We wear the costume of an assumed persona, and far too often we do that to protect ourselves against dangers that are often all too real. When I was growing up, my mom had a friend she had known since her school days named Verna. She would take me with her when she went to visit Verna. Verna lived in this little house in our small southeast Texas town with another woman named Billy Joe. Verna was smart and funny and would give my mom all sorts of great practical advice about life, love, and relationships. Billy Joe was a little gruff and very quiet, but nice. She wore her hair very short and flattened and used to work on my mom's car for her. Billy was a lesbian and Verna was bisexual. And though I likely didn't know those terms back then, even at that young age, I somehow knew that they were more than they were pretending to be. They weren't just friends and roommates who hadn't yet found men. Well, around the house, Verna wore jeans and a t-shirt or sweatshirt. Billy Joe's preference was flannel and cargo pants. Neither wore makeup. But when they went out somewhere together, they would make up their faces. Billy Joe would try to fancy up her hair, and they would both dress in what was considered more feminine outfits. Those masks, those costumes were necessary for them to avoid potential harm in that little southeast Texas town. And so many of us have done this, worn masks, dressed up in a persona other than our true selves in order to keep ourselves safe. Especially when I was younger, I have passed as straight in order to protect myself from harm that might have come my way if I'd been recognized as gay. People of color encounter heavy pressure to adopt white cultural norms and behaviors, suppress their own culture in order to, for instance, succeed in the workplace. Likewise, women testify about accepting stereotypically masculine mores as the price for career advancement. In an article in Scientific American, gay African-American physician Chase T.M. Anderson writes about the personas, the masks he wore to protect himself from racism and homophobia as he moved through medical school and into practicing medicine. Chase Anderson writes of fantasy Chase, the Chase with no armor who was open and trusting with everyone. This mask, he says, allowed him to hide his rage at a medical system and a country full of inequities to avoid being branded the stereotypical angry black male. Snow Chase, his coldly calculating persona, measured every interaction and drove him toward perfectionism so that he could believe his accomplishments were truly his own. Warrior Chase was the crusader who railed against racism and homophobia he witnessed directed at others to hide, he says, to hide his pain over when people in his past hadn't spoken up on his behalf. Shadow Chase was the mask that hid his deepest vulnerabilities, his depression, and the thoughts of suicide he had once had. He writes that by lashing out in intentionally hurtful ways at people who were enacting bigotry, Shadow Chase masked his deepest fear, his fear that he deserved the racism and homophobia he encountered because he had dared reveal these aspects of himself. Well, he tells how finally, after having done much self-work, finally having shed these masks after he began practicing medicine in California, reclaiming his true self and his true heritage. Let's take a short break now. You may remain seated as we sing together once through hymn number 1003 in the Till hymnal, Where Do We Come From? So, sometimes our masks, the costumes we wear, may protect us. They may even be necessary for our personal safety. Sometimes, though, this potential adaptation can instead work against us. As our reading from Brené Brown said earlier, our masks can become suffocating. They keep us from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, to live into the many facets of our most authentic selves. And yet, vulnerability is where we find true connection and belonging. Our masks may fool us into feeling strong, but what they are really doing is keeping us from embracing our courage and living wholeheartedly. One of our spiritual values in this church is courage, which we define as to live lives of honesty, vulnerability, and beauty. As a young gay child growing up in the small town I talked about earlier, one of the personas I learned to wear to protect myself was to be the model child. Make good grades, be the fastest swimmer on the swim team, be the perfect, well-behaved child at home, so maybe they would look past that I was gay. But the mask that at one time might have been adaptive could become perfectionism and over-functioning as an adult. It could keep me from living into all of the many aspects of my truest self. It can even today, if I let it. Research has found that we don our mask for a variety of other reasons too. In addition to hiding vulnerability, some of those most common reasons are to hide fear, anxiety, and anger, to be liked and accepted, to hide sadness and depression, to deceive and manipulate, to meet standards of masculinity or femininity. Researchers have also found some common mask we put on to do these things. See if you recognize any of these. The cool guy or gal, calm and collected on the outside, raging bottled up emotions on the inside. The overachiever. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Of course, you'll never find any of these in a Unitarian Universalist church. The martyr sacrifices themselves to save the world while giving up their own desires in the process. The bully uses domination to cover up their deep insecurities and gets elected to public office in some circles, apparently. The control freak uses ardor and power to hide a fear of the unknown. The people pleaser seeks the approval of others to avoid revealing their true values and self. The terribly timid avoids relationship rather than face a fear of failure or rejection. And finally, the social butterfly fills life with casual, shallow interactions to avoid true intimacy and hide self-doubt. So these are just some of the ways that we can hold ourselves back. Maybe not all the time, but sometimes we fall into these. They hold us back by masking elements of our authentic selves. I want to say also, though, sometimes wearing our masks, adopting what may at first feel somewhat like a persona, can help us maintain appropriate boundaries or begin to reveal parts of ourselves that we haven't in the past. As a minister, there is a certain persona I must assume to establish appropriate boundaries and avoid the potential for doing harm. Most people have a persona that is appropriate for their professional environment, which is probably more restricted than at home with family or friends. The masks we wear around our children are probably very different than those we wear when we're at the pub. On Halloween, we dress up as witches, monsters, vampires, and the like, which can be a way of acknowledging our shadow side, which we try to avoid too often otherwise. Likewise, we dress up as superheroes to experience power, perhaps, that we too often deny that we possess. One of the most common costumes for straight men every year at Halloween is to dress up as a woman, which social scientists have found is at least sometimes a way to express a feminine side, which society still otherwise largely discourages. I'd like to close this section of the sermon by talking about Cher, Lil Nas X, and Elton John. Because why not talk about Cher, Lil Nas X, and Elton John in every sermon? Each of these became stars by adopting a persona on stage. Each of them say that around the house, in everyday life, they're not the person they are when they put on the costumes to go on stage. And yet they each say that larger-than-life persona lives within them somewhere, is a part of who they are. And letting that persona out has made each of them a superstar. I'll bet each of us has a superstar that lives within us somewhere. And if wearing a costume or donning a mask, at least at first, is how we release that superstar into our world, well then bless the costumes and masks, because they may set us free. Now let's take another break from Chris and sing that hymn through one more time. couple of years ago, I shared the work of Amy Cuddy, a social psychologist who studies body language. She has found that when we're feeling confident, we adopt a more open and expansive pose and body posture. She found that the reverse is also true, though. Adopting an expansive superhero pose can help us feel more confident. And she found that even when we face challenges, if we adopt this more open, expansive pose, both physically and psychologically, we can go beyond just faking it to make it. Essentially, we can try on what we hope to develop in ourselves and wear that costume or mask until we become it, or until it becomes a part of us. She experienced this herself after she suffered brain damage from a car accident that impaired her cognitive processes. She had to fake it until she made it so that she could become the social science researcher she wanted to be at Harvard. It's worth sharing again Amy Cuddy talking about when she knew she had tried that on long enough to have become it.
At the end of my first year at Harvard, a student who had not talked in class the entire semester, who I had said, look, you gotta participate or else you're gonna fail, came into my office. I really didn't know her at all. And she came in totally defeated, and she said, I'm not supposed to be here. And that was the moment for me, because two things happened. One was that I realized, oh my gosh, I don't feel like that anymore, I don't feel that anymore, but she does, and I get that feeling. And the second was, she is supposed to be here. Like, she can fake it, she can become it. So I was like, yes, you are. You are supposed to be here, and tomorrow you're gonna fake it, you're gonna make yourself powerful, and you're gonna, and you're gonna go into the classroom, and you are gonna give the best comment ever, And she gave the best comment ever, and people turned around, and they were like, oh my God, I didn't even notice her sitting there, She comes back to me months later, and I realized that she had not just faked it till she made it, she had actually faked it till she became it. So she had changed. And so I want to say to you, don't fake it till you make it, fake it till you become it. It's not do it enough until you actually become it and internalize.
So, we can sometimes engage in personal and spiritual development by trying on something new, something to which we aspire, and wearing it until we see what develops. And I think the interim ministry period this church is in right now is a perfect time for the church to try things on. We might try different ways of doing worship. Those of us who have cultural backgrounds that lead us to prefer quieter, more contemplative worship might try on joining in rather than resisting, trying to feel the spirit that others are feeling when worship sometimes gets more rambunctious. Likewise, those who prefer noisier, more kinetic worship might try on moving deeply into our more contemplative worship elements to explore the potential transcendence these moments may offer. If we truly want a multicultural, multi-generational congregation, we will need to wear elements of both. We might try on breaking down elements of white supremacy culture like perfectionism, urgency, worship of the written or spoken word, though I'm not going to stop talking right now. Believing there is only one right way, either or thinking, fear of open conflict. Those of us who don't have children in our households could try on imagining if we did and what it might feel like to visit a church with a full-fledged family ministry that integrates us and our entire family into all aspects of church life. Our pastoral care and memorial services teams are reimagining how church participants can better support one another. Let us try on every person in the church feeling held and supported through life's joys and life's times of challenges and sorrow. Our social action team is just on fire these days. We are already well on our way toward becoming a leading voice in this, our state capital, for the principles and values that we hold dear. We are trying on being the church that can bring a legion of justice for a rally for justice or the climate crisis at the state capitol, or a chorus of voices to bear witness in public testimony or visits with legislatures. In coordination with our other local churches, we can try on leading those who share our values to cry out, "Oh, thank goodness, here comes that sea of Unitarian Universalists in their bright yellow Side with Love t-shirts," and causing those who have been inflicting such harmful laws and practices on so many in our state to cry out, "Oh no, here comes that sea of yellow t-shirts." Now, I have to say that this religious community is already doing really great work in all of these areas, from trying on new and different forms of worship, to engaging in anti-racism, anti-oppression work, to terrific religious education and fellowship for all ages, to supporting one another, to doing justice, to build the beloved community. So rather than fake it until we make it, perhaps our opportunity right now is to try on making it even greater. During this interim period, let's take the opportunity to clothe ourselves in the superstar that burns brightly within this church and let it burst into its full and magnificent brilliance upon the stage of our community and our world. Where do we come from? Well, we'll be exploring our history as a church in the days and weeks to come. Where are we going? We get to try that on together.